Yeah,
how, kind of like anxiety in general, what does that look
yeah,
like? And then how do we know that we've crossed over to, okay, you clinically have anxiety and you really need to
yes,
seek
yes.
treatment?
Yes, absolutely. One of the ways, like for parents, and when I speak to parents in different groups, I like to give them a little bit of a little triad that they can kind of think through about anxiety. And I say, worried thoughts produce anxious feelings, which leads to stress in our bodies. And so, thoughts, feelings, stress, worry, fears, anxiety, and then stress. So, a lot of times our anxieties are just heightened levels of fears and worries that we have. So, on a given day, a kid might have a worry about, man, am I going to do okay on this math test today? And he gets through the math test and it's fine, it disappears. Let's say, though, for some kids, though, they start to really hyper focus on their grades and their academics. And that fear and that worry actually leads to heightened feelings of anxiety, which over time, left unaddressed, can really physically stress out the body. And so, when parents are asking the difference between, hey, what are just everyday worries and fears and anxieties that we all have versus how do I know my child's actually potentially struggling with an anxiety disorder? That's where a professional diagnosis with a licensed mental health professional will be helpful for you. And those are really for children who are experiencing those heightened feelings of anxiety for a prolonged period of time. So, the DSM 5, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health Disorders, they're actually looking for about a 6 month timeline of a child or a teen feeling those feelings for a long, prolonged period of time.
And it's a good word for us as parents, both sides. Like, if you see like, "Oh, my child was struggling for a week or 2 weeks, and then they kinda
Yeah,
snapped out of it." It's like, okay, that's kinda like kids will do
yeah,
that. But then on the same
yeah.
token, if you see your child like, "Wow, all year, my child
Yes,
has been struggling,"
yes,
like, maybe that's not normal. Like, I need to
exactly.
go change something. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times, what things I'll encourage parents to be on the lookout for is, are their fears and anxieties, are they inhibiting them from being able to do everyday activities? Are fears and worries and anxieties keeping them from engaging in activities that previously they enjoyed? Like, do you see your kid pulling away from friendships, sports activities, church youth group settings, right? Things and settings and places that typically they would have found a lot of joy or a lot of happiness in. When you begin to see your child withdrawing, not wanting to participate, being paralyzed and overwhelmed by some of that, that kind of begins to, raise some caution lights or some caution flags for you as a parent.
I think that's so helpful as you're talking about the worries and then those feelings and then those physical symptoms. So let's
Yeah,
say you have a kid and they're complaining of headaches or they're
yeah,
complaining of stomach aches and it's not just one time, it's kind of a recurring theme.
yeah,
How can you kind of reverse engineer thinking back, okay, you have
yeah,
this, let's go back. Maybe you don't just need a Tums, like maybe there's something
yeah,
else happening here.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good question. I think sometimes those issues can really stump parents. You can think, man, is this just my child making up something so that he can avoid something, or
Right.
do they need a Tums? Is there something legitimate going on? And I would say that's where you want to be a good, I would just say, investigator and knower of your children. So understanding patterns, understanding some of their previous behaviors. If this suddenly comes out of nowhere and suddenly they're just getting a lot of headaches and stomach aches and things like that, to be able to reverse engineer, okay, what might be going on here? I know it's not something we ate because we all ate that same meal and we all feel fine. Is there a test? Is there a sports activity? Is there a broken relationship that they're experiencing? Is there something in the future that they're nervous about that could be potentially serving as a context for their body physically to be responding to? And then physically, if the problems persist and they really raise a level of concern, that's where, of course, like talking to your child's pediatrician is going to be helpful. Talking to a healthcare worker to say, hey, we just want to do due diligence. Let's cross off what we can, and then whatever it is that we're left with that might be not just purely physical, but that might also be psychosomatic, that's something then that we realize we're going to need a whole personed approach to.
Yeah. What are the kinds of things you're seeing that, as parents, as kids and
Yeah,
teens come in? What are there some themes that you see again and again, or just
yeah,
to help us
yeah.
understand what's happening?
Arlene, at our counseling center here at Fieldstone, we are seeing so many children and teens coming in with issues related to anxiety and depression, more so than I've ever seen. And I would say they run the gamut. Everything from broken relationships, difficult friendships, friendships that have broken, they don't know why, stress over academics, sports performance anxiety. Um, I would say even recently, just issues with going to public schools, going to private schools where there's violence, where there are racial issues, where there's political issues. I think one of the downsides to just the amount of information overload that our teens and our children get is they have access to media and to things that are going on in the world that you and I didn't have, when we were in school. And so just the level of exposure, honestly, that kids have, I mean, we live in a broken world. We know that. But the exposure to that level of brokenness, I think, has really skyrocketed. And so, you see kids here in Northeast Ohio anxious about something that happened in California or in Alabama or in Colorado or in Nashville. And, it's heartbreaking to see, not only as parents, but as counselors, because you just realize the world that we live in is just really broken. And our kids experience that. And I think feel that on a regular basis.
And I really see that as a call to parents too. Like, sometimes we think, "Oh, they have to be informed." They do not need to be informed
Right.
by CNN 24 hours a day. They don't
Yes.
have to be informed by
Yes.
TikTok and by
Yes.
Instagram and Snapchat
Right.
24 hours a day. Like, that's not
Yeah.
good for them, because
Yeah.
having that constantly, you can imagine if we kept dwelling and looked at the front page of the newspaper or checked news every
Mhm.
10 minutes, we'd be really stressed too. Maybe we are really
Yes.
stressed because
No,
that
I
is
think
what
we
we're
are.
doing.
Yes.
That's the reason
Yes,
why we are.
absolutely.
So I think so
Yeah.
much of it is we have these worried thoughts because we're feeding ourselves with
Yes.
all this worry. And we all
Yes.
know and have
Yes.
heard, all the algorithms, they wanted to, produce
Oh,
anger and
yeah.
emotion and division
Yes.
and unrest,
Right.
because that is catchy and people are
Mhm.
attracted to that. It's the power
No,
of
they are.
bad. Yeah.
Yes. No, no, they
Yeah.
really are. They really are.
Yeah. How can we, I think it's really hard because we realize, oh my goodness, anxious kids, anxious parents. Like, a lot of
Yes.
times there is that
Yeah.
connection of my
Yeah.
child is anxious, not all the time, but
Mhm.
a lot of times
Mhm.
we as parents, we transfer our worry and anxiety to our
Yes.
kids. Help
Yes.
us out to kind of to kind of judge ourselves for a little bit, to say like, "Wait a minute, am
Right.
I the one producing
Yeah.
anxiety and that's what's spilling over to my child?"
Yes, yes. It's such a perceptive question, Arlene, because a lot of times when I'm talking to parents, I actually do try to turn it back on the parent to say, actually, before we ever even address the anxiety of your child, let's take a look in the mirror and see, okay, where before the Lord can I honestly and vulnerably just ask the Lord to search my own heart? Where do I struggle with anxieties and worries? And again, we're all human beings. I don't know of anybody on the planet, or at least that I've met recently, that at some level doesn't struggle with worries and fears and anxieties. And at times, at varying seasons, we don't regulate our emotions properly, and we can get stressed out. And that anxiety and stress can spill over to our children. I think most children are fairly intuitive. They pick up on our moods, they pick up on our nonverbals. They can tell when we're anxious in our voice, in our posture. And so I do think that there's a dynamic where parents, in a lot of different ways, are putting pressure either intentionally or unintentionally on their kids in ways that can serve as a context for anxiety. So, the two big ones that we see are academics and athletics. So just the huge drive. I mean, athletics, sports athletics here in the U.S. is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the pressure on parents to have their kids competing at younger and younger ages, that puts a lot of pressure on children. So much so that a category of sports performance anxiety has been coined for children who struggle in sports settings because they're nervous about their performance. And the same thing goes with academics, right? There are some
Mhm.
parents who maybe don't push athletics, but push a really high standard when it comes to academic excellence, and more so than just, hey, we want our kids to do the best, but at age 6, getting them a tutor to help prep them for SATs and to get into a college. And again,
Right.
I'm perhaps
Yeah.
exaggerating a little bit there,
Right.
but I mean, as Asian Americans, that's probably
Yeah.
not far outside the realm of
Yes.
possibility or plausibility. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true.